Hi there, I'm Coach Kenneth.
And I'm Coach Victoria.
And in this video, we're going to be talking to you about, are you lying to yourself about your breakup or your relationship?
This is really important. Before we get into it, I did want to say that Craig and I are available for coaching sessions. So if you would like to talk about your situation one-on-one, you can head to our website and book from there.
Yeah, we'll be happy to help you out. And boy, people really do lie to themselves.
All the time.
And in my opinion, many of those people have been so badly hurt that they have to lie and almost gaslight themselves because of the pain that they've experienced. They almost learn to gaslight themselves, particularly avoidance. You'll hear a lot of avoidance say, my childhood was great. I have a great relationship with my parents. Meanwhile, it's like, oh, tell me about your dad. Oh, I never met him. But I hear good things. Lots of good things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
This is all based on a concept of cognitive dissonance. And this is also based on an article by Jessica Kohler. She made a Psych Today article talking about cognitive dissonance in relationships. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that is, why we gaslight ourselves even in the strangest scenarios, and how this impacts our relationships and often leads to breakups.
So what is cognitive dissonance? That sounds like a big term.
It's a fancy word.
I'm tuning out. I don't want to learn new words.
I promise it'll be interesting once we get going.
All right.
So it's when you hold a belief or value that is different from how you're acting, how you're behaving, or it can be two contradictory beliefs that you hold at the same time, two or more. So a lot of times when we have these different beliefs or a big difference in what we believe and how we act, we tend to justify. We say, well, this is why I'm doing this.
Okay.
We tend to have a lot of defensiveness. You know, when somebody approaches us, hey, wait a minute, but didn't you say you believe this and you're doing that? We have a lot of defensiveness. Sometimes we see a lot of anger around that as well. So it can cause a lot of internal unease about this misalignment that we have in our lives.
It's a confusing idea, right? Cognitive dissonance. How does our brain work like that? Why does it work like that? It's like a form of denial.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And it's like, because the reality is so painful that your mind is trying to navigate it in a way where it's almost like you're trying to fool yourself from yourself. Right?
Yeah. And it's almost like we have our idealistic self, the person who we want to be, who we aspire to be, and then the person that we actually are. And it's that gap in between that we really struggle with. You know, how much of the ideal person are we and how much are we not?
So you may feel, for example, you may think, well, I was a really good partner to my partner. I'm a good partner. And then if you look at it more closely, it's like, well, you were lying. You weren't honest about things. You were hiding things. You had cheated on him one time. You had done all these things that don't line up with these views about yourself that you're saying are true. And so you have to be honest with yourself. And you should have a more authentic view of yourself on how you actually are, and not this belief or fantasy of who you wish you were.
Exactly.
You have to hold yourself accountable.
And I have a really great example on this. I was speaking with the client and he was telling me about his several year-long affair that he was having. And he started out by saying, well, no, I never cheated before. I'm not a cheater. I'm not someone who does this. But, you know, this is what's been going on. You know, and I've treated my wife very well in these last couple years. So in that sense, there's that cognitive dissonance of, I'm not a cheater. I'm not this label. You know, I'm not this big bad wolf. But in reality, you know, people who do a lot of good things also do a lot of bad things. You know, we're human and we tend to have a mix of the two. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
You know, so that cognitive dissonance, and when you think about that word dissonance, it's really a musicality term, a term that comes from music. When we hear dissonance, it's when two notes that don't harmonize. It's the opposite of harmony. It sounds off. You know, and listening to it, you kind of have this visceral reaction of ugh. Kind of makes your skin crawl. So that's what's happening internally inside of us when we have this. You know, we have this value. We want to be this person that we aspire to be, but we also realize, oh, there's other things that are not fitting in with my own narrative here. And so a lot of times we rationalize. So our justifications can sound like a lot of things that you all have probably heard.
Yep.
Such as, I was just kidding.
No, you weren't. You were trying to say something that you meant in a way that maybe wasn't as hurtful, but you meant what you said, right? That's not a joke, okay?
Yeah.
There's no twist.
We often deflect.
Okay?
We often deflect when we're in these scenarios. You may also justify it by saying, well, they did it first, or they hurt me worse in this way, so that makes my actions okay. We may also think, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's just not a big deal. And so that's a way where we minimize our own actions to make it align more with who we want to be. It can be I just did that once. Another minimization. It could be, well, they wouldn't care anyways. So almost placing it on them.
Yeah. Yep.
It could be, well, it's called tough love. Trying to find another way to justify, to say, well, it's okay because there is some benefit to it.
You have to be honest with yourself with these. And probably you're hearing this going, ooh, that was me. Ooh, that one was me too.
Yep. And we all go through a lot of mental gymnastics to try to justify our own behavior sometimes and to avoid looking at it straight on. So these are important things to consider in a partnership. When our partner does bring up concerns, it's important that we take them seriously.
Yep. If you don't, they're going to leave. That's the painful consequence of this. If you're not aware of these things and you don't make changes with these things, they're going to walk away.
Right. We tend to minimize. We minimize the way that we hurt. We minimize the way that they're hurting too by our actions. And really this cognitive dissonance, what we're doing by justifying our behaviors is we're both avoiding the actual problem and also avoiding the solution. So a lot of times this just builds and builds, kind of like you're shaking a Coke bottle and it's going to explode. You're letting it brew and it usually becomes a bigger problem. For example, the teasing. It starts out as maybe you teasing your partner in the beginning of the relationship. By the end of it, your partner's saying, well, I feel belittled. I'm feeling like you always put me down. I'm feeling not good enough. And the relationship ends, on that premise.
Yeah.
So you have to really be aware and also be aware of how things are building, any resentments that are there. Another great example is neglect. On one end, we're thinking, well, our partner's just busy all the time and they're working hard. And really we're justifying it in our mind and saying, well, that's okay, I can handle it. Over time, you're ultimately unhappy. So that can be another end of a relationship, something that builds where you're denying yourself of your own needs. So these are things that really, really impact relationships and breakups and are really important when you're doing your own self-reflection on how did my relationship go? Why did it end? Why does my partner want to not be with me? These are things that you have to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. We always talk about trust and the importance of trust, and it's hard to gain and easy to lose, okay? And all those little examples is trust breaking down. You don't feel safe with people when they're doing those things. So if you keep doing things like this, it's not gonna line up with who you see you are or who you believe you are, because you're contradicting it with your behavior. And a lot of times we are quick to point it out in our partner. Well, you did that. You did this thing. But then when you're doing it, it feels okay. Right? So if you're accusing them of this thing and you're like, that's not okay, but then you're doing that same thing and they're accusing you of doing that thing, and so it's just going back and forth and it just deteriorates.
Yeah, it's when the double standard becomes the gold standard in your relationship, becomes a problem.
That's funny.
So, you have to be aware of these things. How to move past this and move through this, really embracing yourself, embracing all of your flaws, really taking accountability. What does it look like? What does it mean?
You're like, I'm a liar! I'm a liar. I'm embracing the liar within. Is that what you mean, Coach Victoria?
We just mean, how do you stop lying to yourself? How do you see the truth? How do you face yourself and face those fears and face that discomfort within yourself? Number one is accepting guilt. accepting guilt as a positive emotion. You know, if there is something that's not aligning with your values, chances are you feel some sort of guilt somewhere within you.
Yeah.
Now, if you're feeling excessive guilt, that's an entire different story, you know, and that is something to be worked on its own. But guilt in itself is telling us that something there is misaligned. We're not who we want to be, and we feel bad about it. And that's okay. That's a healthy feeling. That's a motivating feeling. It's something that I tell a lot of my clients when they're feeling really guilty. Okay, let's explore that. There's a lot that can come out of guilt.
Yeah, guilt is a good thing because it's telling you something's not sitting right within you.
Right, we can do better.
Yeah, it's like a moral compass.
Yeah, exactly. Next is to be very honest and specific with what your behaviors are, how they are affecting you, and how they are affecting your partner. So the more specific you can be, the better in this scenario. So maybe it is a teasing joke. Okay, let's break that down. Let's see where that came from. Maybe it's something that we heard before. Maybe it's something we heard from childhood that's echoing now in our adulthood and in our relationship. So really being able to be honest and specific with what we're doing. You know, sometimes when we're vague about it, you know, we don't really get as much information. We don't really know how it's affecting us or others.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to be seen as weak. A lot of times we feel like admitting our flaws, admitting our faults makes us weak. It's like we're surrendering, we're waving the white flag. But in fact, it's a lot of the opposite. It takes a very strong person to be able to say, I'm sorry, listen, I messed up. Listen, I realized that this was a contradiction. So we can feel this weight of, man, I'm hypocritical. But if we're able to admit it, if we're able to acknowledge it, then we can work on it.
Yeah.
Then we can say, okay, well, what are some things that are hypocritical? What's not aligning here? And this can actually be a good exercise for you viewers to write out, you know, what you value and what you aspire to be and where you're at now. And that gap is really, really important. That gap is the process.
Close the gap.
Close the gap.
Close the gap.
Yeah, exactly.
The Gap is going to advertise on this one. No, we're not being closed down. How dare you?
We're still open.
You want to have self-compassion and empathy. Empathy is absolutely huge. You want to really think about how would you feel if your partner did that thing to you, and instead of sitting there saying, well, they did it to me and they were doing this and they were doing that. No, you really want to look at who you want to be and closing the gap on who you want to be versus who you think you are. You know what I mean? And think about how your behavior's affecting your partner. And you know, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things to hurt people sometimes. And you want to, you know, forgive yourself and kind of apologize and move forward. You don't want to kind of keep lingering there. But you do want to think about, you know, the growth that you want to focus on and how you're going to get this self-image that you have lined up with who you are and how you're treating people.
Right. Because really, when you're thinking about it, that cognitive dissonance, the reason it exists is to protect our ego, to protect that self-image. So we tend to choose comfort over growth, and it's comfortable to justify our actions and have this ideal at the same time as it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So the growth is really what's important here, to be more and more aligned. And Margaret used to say it all the time, growing feels good too.
It does.
Being able to improve mental health, positive mental health feels really great.
Yes, personal growth feels great. When you are making better decisions in the areas that you struggled before, you will feel great about those things. And, you know, one of those things that are difficult is feedback. Hearing the feedback from other people.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if somebody is making, you know, maybe an accusation against you or attacking your character or personality and it really hurts, you know, you might want to take a step back and think, well, has anybody else ever said these same things to me? Oh, now that I think about it, 3 of my girlfriends said the same thing about me. Oh, geez.
At the same time or at different times?
Oh, all at the same time, of course. All 3 of my girlfriends said it at the same time. I think they're ganging up on me.
Oh, no.
No, but, you know, if you've had past partners give you similar feedback, you really want to think about that. But until you're willing to explore that without being defensive and defending yourself immediately, you're not going to grow. You're not going to change. You know?
I saw a very interesting, it was one of those trashy memes, and it just asked the question, if all of your exes were in a room, what is one thing that they would all agree on about you?
Yeah.
And I loved that question because it is such a good, even though I think the post was made in jest, I really do think that's an excellent self-reflective question. What do you think they would say? I know all of my exes would say that I'm hilarious, so I'm happy about that one.
I mean, hilarious. Okay, maybe.
I think so. Maybe I'm in denial myself. I don't know.
We're gonna explore the feedback without you getting defensive.
My exes are gonna comment on this video. It's not true.
Not a word of it. Yeah, that's true. I would agree. That's true. What do you think? They would probably say I was silly.
Yeah.
They would probably say I was really silly. Yeah. You have a long list of complaints, do you? That you think they would say?
I think they would just be sending you the medical bill. They wouldn't even...
For the therapy?
Exactly. And for the headaches, no. But speaking on therapy, that's another excellent route in how to work through these things. So there's something, really interesting about how we interact with others. Others are able to see things in us that we can't. Mm-hmm. And so that's why accepting feedback is really important. Mm-hmm. But that's also why therapy is very important. Is our therapists around their clinicians, mental health professionals, they're trained in psychology, in the mind. And so they're trained to be able to spot certain things and how to deliver that information to you in a way that's absorbable.
Mm-hmm.
So
sometimes it's tough. But, we're doing coaching, and that is different than therapy, mm-hmm. right? So as a coach, I would be different in my approach than as just a therapist. Mm-hmm. Got to be a little bit tougher sometimes as a coach. As a therapist, you're not going to work the same way. So there is some differences because we have limited time with you that we're trying to help make you maximize that time with us. Mm-hmm. Whereas therapy, sometimes people are doing it for years and years, and it's just a different kind of dynamic and relationship.
Exactly. So, but we do recommend, being able to go to a third-party professional, us, local therapists, to be able to work through some of these things and really build those relationship skills up. Yep. Be more aware.
What Victoria doesn't realize is that I've been doing therapy and coaching to all of her exes. They all come to me for...
That's only partially a joke.
Oh, yeah. Now that you mention it. All right. So hopefully you found this one helpful. Of course, if you want to get our help personally, you could do that on my website, askcraig.net. I do email coaching and I do Skype. Victoria is also available for Skype coaching.
I'm here and ready to talk whenever you are.
Just click on her name at the top of the website to do that. But that's it for this video. I'm Coach Craig Kenneth.
And I'm Coach Victoria.
And we will talk with you soon.